All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Zeitguys, a podcast focused on the creation and analysis of culture. We hope to discuss a variety of fields such as literature, film, music, and so on, and especially look forward to speaking with and promoting new and independent creators in their respective fields. However, today we will be discussing the Christmas classic directed by Frank Capra, It's a Wonderful Life. I am Alighieri, joined here by my co-host, Gallo.
Good evening, everyone.
So, It's a Wonderful Life was originally released December 20th, 1946. So yesterday was its 79th anniversary, and we thought because of that, it would be fitting to talk about it today, along with it being the same week as Christmas. Now,
S-
go ahead, Galen.
So yeah, I was about to say it actually was because it is the Christmas film, and it's always comfy and cozy to watch this at least once every year around this season. Because who could hate it?
Yeah. Well, there are people who do hate it, but we'll get to that in a bit. But
Oh,
on the
we'll
co-
get to that.
on the contrasts with that, there's a lot of great filmmakers who've praised the film. Steven Spielberg, Akira Kurosawa, David Lynch, Guillermo del Toro, they've all praised the film, and Frank Capra considered it his best film, which he also did a lot of golden age Hollywood classics. He did Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and You Can't Take It With You, which also starred Jimmy Stewart, who is probably the poster boy, or one of the poster boys, at least for Golden Age Hollywood. He's been in a ton of classic films that, if you're into old Hollywood, you may have heard of. Like, aside from the ones we already brought up, The Philadelphia Story, and he did a bunch of films with Alfred Hitchcock, Rope, Rear Window, The Man Who Knew Too Much. And then he was also in a great Western where he co-starred with John Wayne, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Anyways, Gallo,
Speaking of
yeah, go ahead.
speaking of Jimmy Stewart, this is probably it's definitely not his breakout role because when people think
Well,
of Jimmy
no.
Stewart, they normally think of him from the Golden Age of cinema for more of a slapstick comedy, whereas here we get to see him as a fully real and raw actor acting out the life and drama of a man at the end of his rope, and it's incredibly engaging. This is not a man you normally see as a man who loses his temper or gets angry, but it comes through very clearly in this thing when he has gone through essentially hell in the space of a day and is basically having a completely understandable generational crash out. And it's just he just sells it so well.
Yeah. And
Definitely one of his best roles.
he does nowadays, for whatever reason, have that slapstick reputation, but I'm not really sure why, because he's been in a lot of serious and more dramatic roles like this one. Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, and obviously every Hitchcock role he did are more serious ones. And even in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, he plays a very earnest character there. But yes,
Very much like George Billy, actually.
yeah, which is probably part of the reason Capra chose him to work with him again for this film. Anyways, did you want to give a very brief summary of the film? I know most people will have already seen the film, but it's some may have not have seen it in a long time. Like before we watched it recently, I think the last time I saw it was in high school, so it'd be good to give everyone a refresher.
Okay, in case you guys haven't seen this since you were a child, or you've quite literally been living under a rock and you've never seen it, the story goes a little something like this. We watched the renewed colored version, so it has some bits added onto it that wasn't an original black and white film, but I will include them here for completeness sake. The film actually starts off with a scene of various people in their houses, and we don't see the people, just see the outside their houses, praying for the sake of George Bailey. And then the screen goes up to the heavens where the angels in heaven, represented by various swirling stars and galaxies, are talking to each other about this matter, about the issue of George Bailey. And we get a lovely uh, bunch of scenes going forward from there to the actual plot of the film over the life of George Bailey from his youth to his adulthood. as the angels comment on him, where he was a kid and he saved his brother from drowning in a broken ice pool, but also suffered a life-changing injury where he lost hearing in one ear entirely, to where he accident to another thing literally a year later where he prevents his employer, Mr. Gower, who run the drugstore in the town of Bedford Falls, who recently got a telegram that morning that his son had died tragically from influenza. And if you know anything about the time period, the Spanish flu was still an issue at that time, even in the post-World War One period. Um, and in his grief, Mr. Gower was not paying attention to his drugs and accidentally put poison pills, presumably meant poison powder meant for rats, presumably, into pills, into a box that was meant to be given to a sick child along the way. But the intent of George Bailey, even though in this one he's like easily 10, maybe 12 at most, notes the telegram, notes the state of his employer, Mr. Gower, is rather bedraggled and heartfelt. And he notices that he wasn't paying attention as he filled the pills. He checks the pill bottle and notices it's poison. And he's not sure what to do. He tries to bring it to his employer's attention. He gets told to fuck off, essentially, because he's lost in his grief. So he doesn't know what else to do. He looks up and sees a sign above his shop saying, "Don't know what to do. Ask Dad. He knows," which is just a very cute quiche Americana from the time period there. I don't even know if it was advertising anything, but it was just very nice. So he goes off to the Baileys alone, where he barges in on a meeting between his father, Pa Bailey, and the infamous character of Mr. Potter as they're arguing over the ownership of Bailey's and Loans and how much is owed and so on and so forth. And he gets rebuffed by his father because he has no time to talk to him about that. And he's then left to his own devices about what to do. He knows better than to take the drugs to the sick person because they're not going to be dead. So he returns back to Mr. Gower in the drugstore. Mr. Gower is off on the phone call with the mother of the sick child, wondering why his medicine's been an hour late. He punishes Bailey for his tardiness, seeing that child's very sick. He must give him the medicine there, and he slaps him in the ear, his bad ear, which actually starts bleeding because it's so weak. But eventually, Bailey shows him that he had accidentally put poison pills in the medicine box and show him his mistake. And Mr. Gower breaks down and hugs Bailey, thankful for his wariness in over preventing him from accidentally poisoning one of his patients. And we see scenes like this leading up to the modern day where we just see the noble qualities and character of Bailey going forward, where he's always looking out for each other, and he has this heroic impulse to suffer and without thinking almost to suffer for the sake of saving another person's life. And this is absolutely vital going forward to key points in the film until eventually we come to a point where we see an adult George Bailey buying a suitcase. And you're looking at the screen right now, you see George with his arms extended, a very very telling image of George Bailey, just his arms extended, showing the grand ambitions and grand ideas he had going forward for wanting to go to college to become an architect. Now, if you've been paying attention, you notice of what I said about his sacrifices, his himself for other people. This continues on in the plot, where he has dinner later with his father and his family. And his father is subtly trying to convince him to stay on and take over the Baileys alone, whereas he adamantly refuses, but politely and respectfully to his father, and saying he wants to continue on to college there. And his younger brother, could work in Bailey alone for 4 years for him and such, while he's away at college. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't happen for him because as he's getting ready to go through to college there, his after he goes out for a dance and meets the future love of his life, Mary, at a charming dance at the high school he was invited to that he's already an alumnus of. but he was invited by his younger brother because it was his graduation party. Uh, he stands there and at a funny scene that's been telegraphed before. The floor of the gymnasium where they're all dancing opens up because of some other man who's jealous that someone else is dancing with Mary. Opens up the floor and revealing the pool below, and they fall in comedically, but. Because they're still dancing while swimming in the pool, but just showing you the carefree nature of the people and their youth. The other dancers on the floor, including the principal, jump in for the hell of it. And we see a romantic scene of George and Mary going home, him walking the lady home, her in a bathrobe, and him in a borrowed footballer's jersey and trousers. And we get that iconic scene where he promises Mary the moon to last with and bring it down to her and all this such. But it's here where tragedy strikes, where Bert and Ernie, two of his friends, roll up in a car and tell him that his father has taken a stroke. So the scene moves on from there, where we move on from that scene by the roadside with him and Mary to him and his uncle. What's his uncle called again?
Billy, I believe,
Do you
Uncle
remember?
Billy.
Yeah,
Yes, so
yeah,
his
Uncle
father's
Billy.
had a stroke, and George has had to take over the build and loan company. And as he's, getting married, having kids, uh, helping improve the lives of the people in town, we see all this, and we also see how Mr. Potter, the local financial magnate, is
Plutocrat.
trying to
Yeah.
take over the build and loan, which we'll get to his characterization a bit later. But uh, that's the main conflict at the core of this is George Bailey trying to having to constantly make sacrifices for the build and loan company and the town, while Potter tries to take over the company because he wants complete control over the town and all the financial institutions there, so he can generate more profit. And we see with a good example of how George improves life of someone concretely is there's Giuseppe Martini, an Italian immigrant, who he's living in one of Potter's slums, and with the help of the loan from Bailey Build and Loan, he manages to get a house, and then he becomes a contributing member of the community by opening a bar, and it's a place where all the people in the town gather and are very social. And so there's also another scene in there. It's the Great Depression hits, and there's the bank run on all the local banks. Potter, who has pretty solid financial position, buys out all the other local banks and tries to buy out Bailey Build and Loan. But Bailey and his newly married wife used the money they saved up for their own honeymoon to pay the patrons of the bank or their withdrawals, because the bank didn't have money at the time because their bank called in the loan. And so the only two banks in town at the end that are still around are Potter and all the banks he's bought up, and Bailey's build-in loan. And then if you
In
want
fact, the
to
way
pick,
Bailey handles that is quite clever. He doesn't actually give, because what the people are buying is not so much the money to store in it, because it's not that kind of bank. It's more like a credit union. Is that they have shares in it there, and they're trying to buy back their shares for as much as they can get. Even though Potter is offering to buy their shares for half their value guaranteed, rather than them getting nothing. So what Bailey does instead is he gives them money, or at least how much money they need to get through the next 2 weeks or whatever until things calm down. But he doesn't sell the shares. He gives it to them as a loan, so they don't sell their shares. So they still own the company, their shares in the company, so that Potter can't buy him out. It's
yeah,
very clever.
yeah. Now, if you wanted to pick up with where we leave off in the most recent like section where there's the time jumps.
Oh, the time jumps, and after the Bailey loans and the Great Depression, we head on to. Do we go straight to the war part after this? I think.
I believe so, yes. So World War II happens, and uh George's brother, Harry, correct me if I'm wrong, Harry?
Yeah, it's Harry.
Yeah,
Harry.
Harry,
He's
he
he's
becomes
a Navy
a
Navy fighter pilot.
yeah, he
Yeah.
becomes a Navy fighter pilot in Ace. He wins the Medal of Honor, and a bunch of other people from the town go off to war and become heroes too. But, George,
Really?
because of his
Yeah.
condition with his ear, isn't eligible for the army, and, Mr. Potter, because Capra really wants to, like, you know, dig in and make sure you hate him, is the head of the local draft board. So he is literally the guy deciding who to send off to die in the war.
And
Now
he almost the scene there actually has him just say A1, A1 to every single draft that comes across him. He's just sending all the young men off.
yeah, and then,
But
go ahead.
go
Oh, you
ahead.
pick up.
It actually is worth noting that despite that, his friends who went off to the war, like Bert and Ernie the taxi driver, Bert the cop, do come back. And I think Bert and Ernie were in Europe, and Harry was fighting in the Pacific, where he saved a troop transport from two kamikaze pilots, as well as becoming an ace and having 15 confirmed kills in the air, which is quite astounding if you know anything about aeronautical rates for kill counts in those periods. And eventually, and while during all this, George Bailey is, of course, he can't go to war, so he takes part in the Civic Protection Unit, where he runs around and runs air raid drills in Bedford Falls. Not that Bedford Falls is in any event in any actual danger
Yeah.
from Japanese aerial attack, but it's something to do. He was contributing to the civic engagement of society, and during that period, his beloved wife Mary has four kids. Four kids when they have not much to go around and not much money is being made. Uh, and after that, the war ends. The men come home. They grieve after VE Day and VG Day in the masses in the churches of the town. And we actually get a brief scene about that. And we cut to a scene where he's coming down to town, pipe in his mouth, Christmas wreath around his arm, showing out papers to everyone because the front page in the Bedford Falls newspaper is his brother receiving the Congressional Medal of Honor from the president for his gallantry in the Pacific. And as we go that he returns to the Baileys alone, and there's another character we haven't mentioned so far, Violet, I believe.
Yeah, which we
Uh,
can talk about her more, but for the summary, let's just focus on the main, core of the story here.
Yeah, he returns to Bailey and Loan, where the banking examiner is there reviewing company records, and he wants 8,000 up front, which George jokes, well, I'm flat broke, and he's
Well,
like,
no, no,
very funny.
no, the thing with the 8,000, so Uncle Billy, who helps run the bank along with George, or credit union, the building loan company, with, George, he meant to go deposit it at the bank, and he bumped into Mr. Potter while he was at the bank, and the envelope with the money ended up in Mr. Potter's hands. And so when Uncle Billy goes to deposit it, he can't find the money. And Mr. Potter, seeing this as a perfect opportunity to get rid of the build and loan company, just keeps the money, the 8,000, and he never gets caught or exposed or returns it at all. He just keeps that 8,000 the whole film. And now it looks like there's been financial malfeasance on the part of Bailey Build and Loan because the bank examiner's there and 8,000, which is a ton of money at the time, is just missing. So George needs to get the money, and desperate, he goes to Potter to try and get some a loan. And he points out that his life insurance policy, he can sell the equity in that to put it up essentially as collateral for the loan. And Potter refuses because it was only, I think, 150 that he had in equity with that.
$500 on a
Five, yeah,
15,000,
right. 500 for in collateral for an
15K.
eight, yeah, for the life insurance policy was 15K, but basically 500 in collateral for a $8,000 loan. And so Potter not only refuses, but he also tells Bailey he really lords it over him. Oh, now this 8,000 has gone missing. You're guilty of financial malfeasance, and I'm going to call the police, and they're going to put a warrant out for your arrest. And so George is really devastated by this, and he goes home and has a legendary crash out. He screams at his wife and his children because it's obvious and understandable he's very frustrated. And
Suzu's sick.
there's a whole table of architecture models that he's been working on because he still didn't completely give up on that initial dream he had, but he smashes them up and then calls the teacher at his daughter Zuzu's school and shouts at her because they sent Zuzu, his daughter, home underdressed in the winter. So he's screaming that, "Oh, we pay taxes for this, and you're trying to get her sick," so on.
Yeah, and of course, after that, after he realizes what he's done, he apologizes to his family. Really, and he's sticking himself. So he does what any man reasonably in that situation does. He goes and gets shit faced drunk.
Yes.
He heads to Martini's bar and gets drunk, and he's very clearly upset. Nick, the bartender, notices, as does Mr. Martini, who's also there in the crowd. And they beg him not to leave. Oh, there's also a scene where the wife, the husband of the teacher, who he just after excoriated on the phone, figures out who he is and clocks him on the mouth, cutting his lip. But after that, he decides, I'm just gonna go. And Martini and Nick beg him not to go, and of course he
Now,
goes anyway.
now
But
a
go
key
ahead.
thing here I forgot to mention is in the earlier scene when Potter is lording it over George that he's lost the 8,000 with the life insurance policy. Potter says you're worth more dead than alive. And so after this whole incident at the bar and his crash out and a whole bunch of other minor things that just make his awful night even worse, George goes to the bridge and considers throwing himself over the side and ending his life so that his family can take out the life insurance policy and use that to cover the missing 8,000. And
And
then
this is where the angel comes in, and we pointed before that the noble characteristics of George Bailey are very obvious, even from when he was a child. And just as he was about to jump in and throw himself and let himself be taken by the cold waters and drown, the angel Clarence appears behind him before he knows it and decides to, you know what? I'm going to take advantage of your good nature and jumps in the water ahead of him. And George Bailey, being George Bailey, sees another man jump into the water, cry for help, forgets himself, takes off his greatcoat, and jumps in the water to save the man and drag him to safety, completely forgetting he was going to kill himself in that moment because that's just the kind of man he is. And they dragged themselves over to, yeah, the man who was looking after the bridge, some kind of steward there in his
yeah.
office.
And
And they get,
then
go ahead.
him and Clarence and George are having a talk, and George is still very down in the dumps, and he eventually gets to saying it would have been better if he was never born. And Clarence has a bright idea and is like, "Well, you know what? This is actually a good idea to give him some perspective." And he shows him a world that would have been if he was never born. And we go from Bedford Falls to Pottersville, which is a far worse off place than Bedford Falls. It's first place I believe they go is the bar, which in the original timeline is owned by Martini, but it's instead now a shitty
Owned by
bar
Nick.
that, yeah, run by Nick, who that's quote serves hard drinks for men who want to get drunk fast. And it's clear that the socializing there is pretty heavily discouraged. Nick is very hostile when Clarence tries to talk to him. And so it's a very far cry from the jovial social atmosphere of Martinis. And then Gower, the pharmacist, comes in and they find out that he was completely ruined and he spent 20 years in jail and now he's a drunk hobo because George was never there to stop him from accidentally giving the kid those poison pills after when he got the telegram about his son dying. And after this, George walks down Main Street, and we notice how different Pottersville is from Bedford Falls. Police sirens are a much more common sound. You can hear them in the background pretty consistently, whereas in Bedford Falls, did we hear them even once?
No, and the only cop we know is Bert, and
Yeah,
he Bedford Falls was so peaceful. Bert felt comfortable just fucking off in the middle of the day to go visit his wife.
yeah,
I could get away with that.
and then all along the main street, there's a ton of vice establishments, like crappy little dive bars. There's a pawn shop, midnight club,
Burlesque house, yeah.
burlesque houses, striptease joints. And Ernie, he goes to Ernie, the taxi driver, and you know, in the original timeline, he was a war hero, and he lives in a house that Bailey helped him get. George Bailey helped him get with the whole build and loan company. But here, he's just he's still a taxi driver, but his wife and kid left him during the war, and he lives in a dinky little shack in Potter's Field. And then George's
Which, yeah.
yeah. And then Mary and George and they had renovated this old abandoned house and began living there and spruced it up and all that. But here in Pottersville, it's still this rundown ruin since it was never renovated. And then after George and Clarence leave there, they go to Ma Bailey's, who's running a halfway home, and she's obviously a widow with no son, no husband, because Harry, George's brother, died in the initial accident with him falling under the ice. And so he was never a hero in the war. He didn't, save those people on that transport ship and win the Medal of Honor. And Ma Bailey is a lot more cautious and about who she helps out. She's still a good person, but she doesn't let anyone stay at the halfway home that she doesn't know unless she gets a recommendation from someone she does know. And then Uncle Billy wound up in an insane asylum after the credit union went under. And Mary, the wife of George Bailey, is an old maid, still single, and she just works at the local library and seems a lot more miserable, same as everyone else.
Kid
And
is
so,
kind of afraid of talking to people in the street after she leaves the library as well, showing that
yeah,
it's not really a safe town anymore
no,
either.
yeah, and we'll discuss Pottersville a lot more, but this is just a
Oh yeah.
summary. And so George comes back to reality, and he is after seeing all the horrors of what things would have looked like if he had never been born. He's much more in well, he's very glad to be back and to have his wife and his friends and all that, and he comes back home and hugs his wife and kids, and then the whole community comes together and helps George pay the missing 8K to pay him back for all of his help to the community over the years. And this sort of aid where everyone gets together and helps George at the end of the film is the exact sort of community and mutual aid that Pottersville makes impossible because it destroys those natural bonds of community. And then, anyways,
Yeah.
the film ends off with George receiving Clarence's copy of Tom Sawyer. I believe it was a Mark Twain book. I'm pretty sure it was Tom Sawyer.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
Adventures of Tom Sawyer,
And
Sawyer,
then
yeah.
there's the famous thing Clarence wrote inside. No man who oh god, I'm
No man is a
sorry.
failure who has, remember, no man is a failure who has friends. Thanks for the wings.
Yeah. And so that's how we close off the film. Although, Potter still got away with stealing the 8K. But yes. Now, The film initially it got more mixed reviews. There were people who were very enthusiastic, people who didn't like it, but interesting thing actually is that at the time there was some paranoia that it was a communist film, like the FBI, because this is during the whole post-war
Cold
Red
War.
Scare. Yeah, there was concern that it was communist propaganda, and let me pull up the FBI memo.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, go on with that.
Yeah, so the next year in 47, the FBI issued a memo which said, with regard to the picture It's a Wonderful Life, redacted, which is the name of the agent, stated in substance that the film represented rather obvious attempts to discredit bankers by casting Lionel Barrymore as a Scrooge type so that he would be the most hated man in the picture. This, according to these sources, is a common trick used by communists. In addition, Redacted stated that, in his opinion, this picture deliberately maligned the upper class, attempting to show the people who had more money were mean and despicable characters. And now, while this FBI memo was there, this did go to the House of Un-American Activities Committee, but they decided to take no further action with the film, and the controversy just kind of died down. But the film
But what
really gained its popularity when the copyright eventually expired in the 70s, and it could be broadcast by anyone, and it became a holiday classic and gained a new popularity then. And now it's considered
yeah.
a very beloved Christmas film, if not the Christmas film.
It is something worth talking about, that communist influence on the thing, because the FBI are also skeptical of the two writers of it, Francis Goodrich and Albert Hackett, who are supposedly were very close to known communists, and on one occasion in the recent past practically lived with known communists who were observed eating lunch every day with known communists. Which, to be fair, it was Hollywood in the 50s. They
Well,
probably did, but didn't
40s,
even know they
but
were
yeah,
communists. Oh
40s,
yeah,
yes. Anyways, with regards to the film, there's obviously the main underlying struggle of George constantly having to self-sacrifice and turn away from his dreams to help his local community. And this is initially with him not going off on his tour to Europe.
college.
Well, no, he was going to Europe first, so he decides to not go off to Europe so he can help the credit and loan company because his brother, well, no, his brother doesn't go off to college yet. For the
Eh,
It was because his
You know,
father had the stroke, I believe. Yeah,
he had a stroke and he had to take over at a
yeah.
time, and then
And then four
his
years later, he is Europe thing is just out the window. But he can finally go to college. All his friends have already gone to college, but he can finally go now. And then there's the issue where the board of the build and loan will not sell to Potter on the condition that George takes over as the executive secretary, I believe was his title. And so he
Yeah, it
agrees to
was.
that. And so now his dreams of college are dashed, and he gives the money he was saving up for college to his brother, who goes off to college. And 4 years later,
He
yeah, go ahead.
yeah. He was planning he was like, "Yes, I'll send you off to college for 4 years, but you come back and do business note, and I'll try again for my
Yes.
attempt to go to
Yeah.
college."
That's an important thing to note.
And then his brother comes back with a new
And
wife,
yes, with a new wife who
a
her
father who
her
was gonna give him a job.
father was gonna give Harry,
Harry.
George's brother, a good job at a glass factory in their R&D department. And George, seeing this as a good opportunity for his brother, again decides to do the self-sacrifice and continue with being in charge of the build and loan while his brother goes off and gets this successful job. And
And this was before the depression thing, I think, because I remember they got married
yeah,
and then the depression hit, yeah.
yeah, and then the noting the depression thing, we already talked about how they used their honeymoon money to give the payouts for the withdrawals from the credit union. And
Yeah.
so we see this over and over, the self-sacrifice, and some of the people who haven't had such fond views of the film over the year talk about how they emphasize this point, this whole self-sacrifice thing, and talk about how small town America is suffocating and Bedford Falls is just an awful place that tears down George's dreams. And, to some extent, there is this whole there is something correct about this kind of suffocating small town America thing, but at the end of the day, we see that it's a better place for George being there. He's happier for it, and everyone in the town is, because when we go and look at what Pottersville looks like, it's miserable. Everyone there is worse off for it. And
Themselves the way George thought he wanted it to be.
yeah, and
Whereas Bedford Falls, the better timeline is better off because of people like George
because
and
people
George's
like George.
influence.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it's also worth pointing out the film is very aware of this whole thing. George is repeatedly frustrated by him having to pick his responsibilities over his dreams, but at the end of it, things worked out well enough that he was happy with his wife and kids and his community. So you can, if you want to say that's stifling, you can do that, but there's a
I
different. Yeah, go ahead.
I want to bring that this entire point, which we're talking about here with the stifling small town thing, is very relevant to generations today, both millennials and especially
Yeah.
Zoomers, and
Actually,
myself in
yeah.
particular. 'Cause I always felt I was stuck in my own hometown. Not there's nothing wrong with it, but I always wanted to leave it for my own ambitions,
Yeah.
but felt I
And
couldn't.
this actually brings up
So
a very good point I wanted to talk about with this whole stifling thing is a lot of times now you're not necessarily nowadays asked to like take over the family business and self-sacrifice for that. But there is times where you're as a young guy, you're asked to make a lot of sacrifices. The difference now is it's not really for anything. You're not making sacrifices for your community and for Bedford Falls. You're making sacrifices for Pottersville because yes, Pottersville is closer, I'd say, to the average r- um American experience nowadays than Bedford Falls. And
only becoming worldwide experience at this point.
yeah. So there was another point you wanted to make before I interrupted you?
It basically, it was building on that whole point of how it's relevant to the consumers' ambitions of like having their ambitions stifled, especially after COVID, which is definitely something that happened
Yeah.
to George, where but in George's case, most of his self-sacrifices were his own decisions, but sometimes circumstances did just screw him over, like the depression, the war, his own injuries. In the modern day, we're struggling, especially as young, ambitious, talented people. If you have an education, which George was denied, you can't really feel like you're getting anywhere or make a good job or even save $5,000 on a working man's salary, which is a point in the film that feels just as relevant today as it did back then.
Yeah.
In order to build a house, in order to get a house, which is a key aspect of everything that Baileys and Loans actually does, is to help people be able to afford houses, which gives them an economic foothold to become a contributing member of society, like the Martini subplot, which
Now,
is something we desperately want today, but we just feel we can't have. So it's hard not to resonate with the righteousness of George Bailey in
yeah.
his film.
Now, this film, it's obviously one of the most famous Christmas films. That's part of why we picked it, but another reason is the It's a Wonderful Life has been in the discourse lately for whatever reason. There are certain people who take a
Hmm.
perhaps
Go
pointlessly
on.
contrarian perspective, perhaps really they buy into it, view that Mr. Potter is the real hero of the story. The guy who
The man who wanted to keep
Capra
people in slums.
yeah, the guy who Capra went out of his way to make look as bad as possible. But The argument basically goes that, Jimmy Stewart's character, George, is financially irresponsible. He's giving loans out to, you know, untrustworthy creditors and that. And so that's going to bankrupt the small town and the little bank. But actually, when you watch the film, it's clear that's not really the case. Yes, George is giving loans out to more working class people, but the whole way the system works is that he is giving it to people who, do have an income and are shown to be of good character and contributing members of the community in the faith that they will pay it back. And it
They
allows,
usually do.
yeah, and they
Yeah.
usually do. And Giuseppe Martini is the perfect example of it in the film himself. He starts off living in the Potter's Field slum, and then he gets the loan. He gets his own house, opens the bar, becomes a contributing member of the community. It becomes a social space where everyone can gather, something we're really missing nowadays. And then he pays back the house loan for
And
George.
yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, like many people in the end, he comes to George's rescue
Yes.
with an entire basket full of money that is probably the float from the bar itself. It's like, okay, George, you helped me, my family out to accomplish my dreams. Of course, I will give you money for this Christmas to help you out.
And then, Potter, by contrast, he takes people he can squeeze as much money out of them as he can. He's he's described what was it? George is talking to Potter and contrasting him with his father, where he says people were human beings to him, George's father, but to you, a warped, frustrated old man, they're cattle. And that really encapsulates the way Potter views people. He makes them live in literal slums, and he is very predatory. He buys out all the banks. And when we see what Pottersville looks like, he destroys all the social trust that was there in Bedford Falls by bringing in these uh less savory
Low class establishment.
businesses and
Low,
generally encouraging vice because it's short-term profit, which, as a childless, familyless old man, uh, Mr. Potter really couldn't care less what happens to Bedford Falls after he's dead. He just wants to make his money and get out. Whereas Bailey, people talk about how, yeah, his thing is very short-sighted and he's giving it to unreliable creditors, but it's actually a very community-focused mutual aid way of doing the whole loan thing. And it can only
very.
really work in a place where there is a tight-knit social community and high trust. But
I
yeah,
go
go
ahead,
ahead.
sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I, I was going to say this, like I've said this before in conversation when we're talking about this. It's very paternalistic the way George Bailey is represented here, as he's not exactly a rich man himself, despite owning a literal credit union. But he acts in such a way the way he's basically a patrician of his community, looking after all the people, and to the point where he's even slowly building up a small housing estate called what was it, Bailey Park or something? Yeah, it was Bailey Park.
Yeah, I believe so.
And and this is a point that was brought up by the FBI agent in the memo before, like depicting bankers and rich people as militias. But that is absolutely the opposite of the case if you watch the film itself. Every rich person we see, and we do see multiple persons there, including the other board members of the Bailey Loan themselves, who all are persuaded by George Bailey's speech and elect him the chief executive of the business. And we also see one of his friends, Sam Wainwright, who becomes a very rich industrialist and capitalist in New York and London, and who never really forgets George Bailey and occasionally contacts him, and also comes back in the end to give a line of credit to George Bailey to ensure Bailey loans could never go under within the next year, like something massive, like
Yeah.
$25,000, something insane in that time period. What we actually see in the movie is everyone coming together from the lowest taxi driver to the highest capitalist in the end, with literal war heroes and everyone in between coming together for the sake of Bedford Falls and the man who made it possible.
Yeah.
it is far from class conflict. It is class cooperation, and it is entirely touching because it is not anti-capitalist at all. It's not anti-money. It is not anti-status. Not anti-class. It is about the community and about America. It is actually very beautiful.
Yeah, and it's interesting that just shy of 80 years after the film was released, its social commentary still feels very relevant today, although we obviously, like I said, it's Pottersville is the more common experience, and so we don't have these high trust communities and institutions where something like that could happen, where you could have the small build and loan that people borrow the money, but they make sure to pay it back, and when George is in dire straits, they pay him back. And that's another angle of criticism some people have given the film is they're like, "Yeah, Pottersville is wonderful. That's where we live now. Oh, that this is our modern society, which is so great." And we've kind of made our own feelings on that clear, but you just see
Potter
the
in Pottersville, the green line always goes up, don't you know?
yeah, but it really is about long-term thinking about the good of the community versus short-term profit of one man or company, whatever it is. That's the contrast between George's Bedford Falls and Pottersville. And when you look at it that way, it's clear why some people who favor certain worldviews would look at Potter as the hero of the film because he represents a very numbers
Very,
focused way of looking at things. And
very
they
spreadsheet, very
yes,
materialistic.
very
Yeah.
spreadsheet, very materialistic, and they like to frame it as being long-term thinking like, "Oh yeah, the business is going to be healthy and it's going to do well, and so the town will prosper." But really it's about short-term profit because we see that Bedford Falls goes from this high trust community, all everyone is, on pretty good terms with each other. It is a bit stifling, but it's a nice place where one can raise a family and all that and work their way up. But Pottersville, there's constant police sirens, all these vice establishments. People don't feel safe walking home, and everyone is very on guard and hostile. And the bar is just a place to get shit faced drunk, which, I already said that's said in the film itself. And so,
There's also
yes, go
another
ahead.
thing we don't actually see in Pottersville, or although it's probably implied, is there's almost certainly an absolute ton of unemployment. Because this was an earlier minor
Yes.
plot point there that I just see a commenter bring up here in the chat, but it's worth bringing up that Sam Rainwright at an early point in the film calls George because Sam was also sweet on Mary at the time. He was calling Mary, but George was there. He's like, "Oh, George, let me put on George. I want to talk to him about something. Hey, George, you want to get in this soybean plastic business?"
Yeah, so
And he talks
it's
about
a
it.
plastics
Yeah,
factory, and he's talking about Sam is talking about building it up in New York, and George is like, "Well, why don't you just build it down here? We have that old abandoned factory, and most of the people in town are out of work, so that helps."
we get all the
Yeah,
labor and cheap land.
yeah, and so that brings in money to the community and business, whereas, in Pottersville, yeah, you're bringing in business of a different kind, but it's probably not creating as many jobs or wealth, and people are still living in the slums, like Ernie, the taxi driver, is, and Giuseppe Martini very obviously is still living there. And so,
Him
yeah,
and his family.
yeah, him and
Yeah.
his family. And
So
go ahead. No, go ahead.
no, no, no. It is just because that was actually a point even back when Pa Bailey was alive that there was an unemployment after the factory had closed. So even just little things like that, George Bailey's influence there, it also shows the good naturedness of Sam Wainwright, despite being a highfalutin capitalist. There was just so swayed by his like charming country friend. Like, sure, I'll buy because convince my boss to build a factory down there. There's no malice in any of the rich people in this thing. other than Mr. Potter, and I think we should probably focus on Mr. Potter for a bit here because it is hilarious how evil he's
Yeah.
portrayed.
Now, Lionel, what was uh
Lionel?
George Lionel?
Lionel.
Lionel Barrymore, yes.
The
So an
Yes.
interesting thing is he had actually been in a prominent radio show or audio drama around the time the film came out as Ebenezer Scrooge. So, and we forgot to mention this, but the film itself is very loosely based off a Christmas Carol. And so that was a very deliberate choice by Capra to uh, use this guy who is known as Scrooge in the public mind as the villain. And there was actually a initial draft of the scene where George saves Harry from the ice that was scrapped for the film. And what it was is
Yeah.
they went on to Potter's land, and Potter literally sicks his hunting dogs on Harry, which causes him to flee, and then that's how he falls under the ice. But that was cut from the film because I guess Potter was already evil enough. They didn't need to make him any more mustache twirling than he already was.
Yeah, he was already ridiculously evil and kind of callous
Yeah,
towards basically everyone. There was also that infamous scene where he offered George Bailey a job in order to try to swindle the thing out of him. I was like, "Can you give me 24 hours to think about it?" And George and Potter thinking he had him said like, "Sure." And George reaches in to shake his hand, but as soon as he touches his hand, he looks down at it as if he feels the evil rubbing off on his hand. You see him rub his hand as to get it clean after touching Mr. Potter's hand, and he goes off on a rant denouncing Mr. Potter and his job deal and storms out of the bank. It is not subtle with Mr. Potter at all.
yeah. And there's a earlier quote by George's father about Mr. Potter, which really captures his character. Quote, he's a sick man, frustrated, sick in his mind, sick in his soul, if he has one. He hates everybody that has anything that he can't have. And throughout most of the film, this thing he can't have is obviously the Bailey build and loan, which he wants so he can have absolute control over Bedford Falls and turn it into Pottersville.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, that's actually an interesting contrast with that whole perspective of Mr. Potter is George's father, where it's that early scene early on in the film where he's having dinner with George, and George is talking about how he wants to get away from the town and he wants to do something bigger than the build and loan. And his father replies that he feels, well, I'll just say the quote, I feel that in a small way we're doing something important, satisfying a fundamental urge. It's deep in the race for a man to want his own roof and walls and fireplace, and we're helping get those things, which shows the very community oriented view that the Baileys take and how it's about the community helping each other, building each other up, and paying back the favor that the everyone else is doing for
Hey,
them.
or to use an old expression, they're paying it forward
Yeah,
kind of way.
yeah, that's a good word.
Yeah.
And then you brought up the scene with Mr. Potter at the office where I believe this is during the Depression, the one where he offers to bail George out, right?
No, I think this is after because he's on the phone to George from the bank, and that's the scene you're thinking of there. The scene where he offers a job, I think, was later.
Okay, well, it's the scene where he offers him the job, so he's goes to Potter, and we see in Potter's office it's very gaudy, very gilded. He has a portrait of himself in there, and Potter himself, we forgot to mention this, but he's actually wheelchair bound. However, it's a very ornate chair. Like, it's got gilding and an elaborate design, and it makes him look taller even though he's sitting down. Whereas in his
Hmm.
office, the actual chair for guests on the other side of the desk is deliberately so low that whoever sits in there is going to be looking up to Potter, which is a really good way of characterizing him and how he wants to be in control of everything and looks down on everyone else, very
Just in control. He
literally.
wants he wants pe he wants people to feel small,
Yeah,
easily crushed.
yes, because he he goes out of his way to do that throughout the film, buying out all the other banks, trying to get people to, you know, get rid of their shares in Bailey's build and loan. So for a guaranteed um, payment of half what their equity in it is worth.
Yeah, it was very clever. It's very I could make a lot of commentary comparing it to later financialization of society and different things, such as certain economic shocks that happened in the last 20 years, if not 40, where crises has happened and certain individuals profited from it immensely.
Yeah, but
That's exactly what's happening here.
let's not get too much into modern politics. But yes,
Oh, yeah.
the what was I going to say? It was something to do with Potter. You go ahead and
In the
I'll
mean
remember it
in the meantime,
to me.
this is something we didn't really touched on enough, and it's a small part but important part of the film. It's how the divine is represented in the film. Now, the film has a lot of interpretations. Like some believe it is just such a warm Christian message, which is very obvious, especially given the inspiration for the film. But also, bizarrely, some people consider it the most secular Christmas film possible. I don't know how you could think that, but sure, especially with the very obvious divine intervention of Clarence, the angel. But this is something that's very I want to touch on it. It's noticeable in American media, but the American it's not even Americanization, it's the Hollywoodization of how heaven is perceived, where people go to heaven and they can become angels, which I'm not even sure if that's even a thing in American Protestantism at the time, but just more or less just Hollywoodization that became a thing where angels are just humans who are dead who have wings and halos now, and St. Peter is literally at the gates of heaven, which is literally just something invented by Hollywood over the years. It's just something interesting that developed out of America wholesale in Hollywood, and not even out of American religion, just out of American entertainment.
Which is interesting because Capra himself, he was actually born in Sicily near Palermo, and and his family emigrated over when I think he was around 5. So he obviously was from a Catholic background. But another interesting thing with the whole accusation of communism with the film is Capra is actually considered kind of the embodiment of the American dream. He came over as the, children of immigrants and whatever. They were very poor and he didn't really have anything, and then he became one of the most famous and successful directors of Hollywood's golden age. So it the idea that this self-made man is creating communist propaganda when the film is clearly more about a community and helping each other than, say, Marxism Leninism as a political program and ideology. But I
Yes,
remembered what I yeah, go ahead. But I remembered what I wanted to say about Potter. You go ahead and make your point though.
yeah, it's a rather ridiculous thing. The only thing I have left to say is just a funny thing about how just the star-studded this cast is, especially some surprising stars. You wouldn't think so, but we'll get to that. You go ahead and make your point about
Yeah.
Powder.
I don't know though. I think that most of the main cast were very A-list actors at the time. But yes, the point about Potter. So the whole thing with him stealing the money, this kind of more than anything else should put a damper on the idea that he's really the hero here. He went out of his way to sabotage the build and loan and even did something as illegal as stealing $8,000. He had the chance to, you know, Uncle Billy was still right there when Potter found out that he, ended up with the envelope. He had the chance to do the right thing at no cost to
No cost.
himself, and he still chose to be spiteful and petty and try to prey on the Baileys and kept the money, which Yes, it's interesting that actually got past the censors because this was at the time when there was a lot more restriction on what stories in Hollywood could do. And one of the rules I remember is the bad guy always has to get punished. But Potter, he completely gets away with it, which I think is interesting. Commentary there from Capra.
Gets away with it, but at the same time, he doesn't get what he wants. Like,
Yeah,
if we ever got a scene after that where we see Potter's like, aha, I've stolen literally 8,000, some insane amount of money. Surely Bailey Loans will go down now, and then just Bailey Loans just like chugs on like an invincible
yeah,
juggernaut. I would have loved to see a scene of him just losing his
yeah.
mind
But
and
at
not be able to crush this tiny little bank.
But at the end of the day, he would still be there and would still have, his control over the rest of the banks in, Bedford Falls. So, I do think
Yeah,
that's
that's true.
a interesting, thing that kinda
No, no,
gets
no.
glossed over with the
I
film.
think I know why to let it slide without him being punished. Because if they did punish Potter, the banker, then it absolutely would be perceived as a communist propaganda at the
Well,
time.
yes, yeah, that's probably a contributing factor, but I think there's also the interesting message about how, these people like Mr. Potter, you can find them at all levels of society, from like the highest government positions to local tyrants, like he is. And, you know, they're not always going to get punished, even if you manage to avoid, like, stave them off and their control over your life. They're still going to be there, and you gotta be cautious about them. Because throughout the whole film, the entirety from when George is a young kid, Potter is already trying to take over the build and loan. And then his whole life till the time he's, I believe, in his 30s in the more later scenes, or late 20s perhaps, Potter is still trying to take over the build and loan. So it's an interesting message there about vigilance with that regards to those sorts of, well, vultures. Just say what it is.
As the American saying goes, the price of liberty is constant vigilance.
Yeah. Now, let's see. Go ahead.
I was I was gonna bring a point about the actors. Like obviously, like it's A-list acting class, and especially Jimmy Stewart himself. But people would be surprised to learn that Jimmy Stewart and the other actors are not the most prolific actors to be found in the
Oh, yes,
cast
this.
of this classic. No, that would belong to another Jimmy involved in the casting roles. One who's very prominently shown in Bailey's Alone having run a place, and that is the little pet raven we see in the Bailey's Alone that belongs to Uncle Billy. That raven is actually a trained raven actor in Hollywood during the golden age. That's the aforementioned Jimmy the Raven. And he, between the 1930s and the 1950s, Jimmy the Raven has appeared in over 1,000 films. That's an unbelievable number for an animal actor.
Yeah. All right. So, was there any other points you wanted to make on the film, or should we some time for questions now if the viewers have any?
Yeah, I'll give some time for questions
All
there
right,
at
let's
this point in
see.
time. I think we talked enough.
All right, we've got
Uh,
our strongest soldier, Evil Florida. Let's see. Um,
yeah, good old even Florida.
he makes some points. Yeah, it was actually George's idea for the plastic factory. Uh, he was the one who brought it up to Sam initially, and then Sam later came back with the idea and is like, "Oh yeah, you know what? This is actually something I've been looking into, and we've got investors, and we're thinking of building it in New York." And then George obviously persuades him to do it in Bedford Falls.
Also, there is another point even Florida brought up that actually shows that, yeah, George is definitely a smart guy without a formal education. But that's
Yeah,
something we realized in the film when he was looking
very
for
early
jobs.
on.
Yeah, oil fields in Venezuela or up in, yeah, Yakut in Canada and all these other places, high paying technical engineering jobs. But none of them at the time period required a formal technical education of a college degree, so long as you actually had experience in architecture and like that. which is an interesting difference in the time period at the time. Credentialism was a thing back then, but it definitely meant something specific. You didn't need the credential loopholes we need to run to nowadays for all these high paying, high status jobs. It's just a very interesting difference in culture between then and now.
Yeah.
Not just in America, but here in Europe as well, especially.
All right. Well, there's no more questions. Perhaps we should start wrapping it up. So I guess we should talk about what we want our takeaway from the film to be. So if you
The
have anything.
takeaway, well, what do I say we haven't said before?
Well,
But the takeaway of this film is ultimately there, on the personal level, is that no matter how black pilled you are and about your life, especially with how things have never gone right, you've never been able to achieve your dreams. Never overlook the small things you may have done in your life that have influenced so many people around you. Like even just the small heroic act of George Bailey saving his brother from the ice had such a knock-on effect that Harry became a war hero and saved the lives of potentially hundreds of other Americans who went back to their families after the war. So just something in your own life there that you may not know and may not be aware of it, but you are important in your life, in the lives of others, even if you think you have no one who cares about you or that you care about. You have had more impact than you could possibly imagine. And I think that's
yes.
the important message to take away from on a personal level from this film.
Yes, I think that's a very good takeaway on the personal level and very well said, especially since actually around the Christmas season there tends to be an up spike in well, apparently it's a bad word on YouTube, but
Taking yourself out of the picture.
yeah, taking yourself out of the picture. But I suppose on the more social commentary side, which the film is, it juggles the personal message and the social commentary very well. But on the social commentary side, part of the reason we decided to talk about this was because of the whole discourse around who the real hero of the story is. And so I guess I'd say there's a naturally an impulse nowadays to be contrarian and to portray the villains as heroes. But when we're making these stories and when we're watching them, we need to think about what is the actual world we would like to live in. Do we want to live in Pottersville where no one trusts each other, where everyone is living in slums and it's crime ridden, or do we want to live in Bedford Falls, which, yes, while it's small and a bit limited, everyone there knows each other and there's a sense of community and people actually help each other out. So I guess the main takeaway is to not be Mr. Potter, to try and be the George Bailey in your own life. No, not to sacrifice your own dreams and that for nothing, but to be someone who actually looks out for the people in your life and to do what you can to help out, extent that's possible, those in your community.
Don't be afraid to be charitable when you can. You don't know how it'll be paid forward.
Yes. All right. Now, was there anything else you wanted to say, Gallo?
Only to wish everyone a very happy Christmas and a hopeful and joyful New Year. And
Yes.
thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. We will return after the new year, but until then, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and have a good day.
Good day.